Think about your last week for a moment. How many times did your emotions hijack your day? Maybe you snapped at someone you care about, felt paralyzed by anxiety before an important meeting, or found yourself spiraling into negativity over something completely outside your control. If you're human, and I'm assuming you are, this probably sounds familiar. Here's the thing. Most of us were never taught how to handle our emotions. We learned math, history, maybe even how to drive a car, but somehow the most fundamental aspect of human experience, our emotional life, was left to figure out on our own. It's like being handed the keys to a Ferrari without any driving lessons. But what if I told you that emotions aren't something that just happen to you? What if they're actually something you can understand, influence, and ultimately master? That's exactly what we're going to explore together over the next hour. We'll discover why your brain creates emotions in the first place, learn practical techniques that actually work, and build a complete system for emotional mastery that you can use immediately. By the end of our time together, you'll have a completely new relationship with your emotional life, one where you're in the driver's seat. So get comfortable, and let's dive into mastering your emotions. Let's start with a simple but profound question. Why do we even have emotions? Your brain isn't trying to make your life difficult. Quite the opposite, actually. Every emotion you feel is your brain's attempt to help you survive and thrive. Think of your brain as having two main operating systems. The first is your ancient brain, the part that's been around for millions of years. This is your emotional brain, and it's incredibly fast. When you see a snake on a hiking trail, you don't think, "Ooh, that's a potentially dangerous reptile. I should probably step back." You just jump. That's your emotional brain doing its job. The second system is your rational brain, the part that can plan, analyze, and make complex decisions. This is the voice that can talk you through a difficult conversation or help you solve a math problem. But here's the catch. It's much slower than your emotional brain. Imagine you're driving down the highway and suddenly a car cuts you off. Your emotional brain floods your system with anger in milliseconds. Your heart rate spikes, your muscles tense, you might even start cursing. Meanwhile, your rational brain is just starting to process what happened. By the time it catches up and says, "Hey, maybe they didn't see us and we're all safe anyway," you've already been hijacked by emotion. This isn't a design flaw. It's actually brilliant for survival. But in our modern world, where most of our challenges aren't life and death situations, this ancient system can work against us. Let me tell you about Sarah, our marketing director who seemed to have everything together. One day, her boss criticized a presentation in front of the entire team. Suddenly, Sarah felt her face flush, her throat tighten, and before she knew it, she was defending herself in a way that made the situation worse. Later, she couldn't believe how she'd reacted. What happened to Sarah is what we call an emotional hijack. Her ancient brain interpreted the criticism as a threat, not to her physical safety, but to her social status and sense of competence. In milliseconds, it flooded her system with stress hormones and put her into fight or flight mode. The key insight here is that Sarah isn't weak or unprofessional. She's human. Her brain was doing exactly what it evolved to do. The problem is that her emotional brain couldn't tell the difference between a saber-toothed tiger and an awkward moment in a conference room. This is why willpower alone doesn't work for emotional mastery. You can't just tell yourself to stay calm any more than you can tell yourself not to blink when something flies toward your face. You need a different approach entirely. Here's something that might surprise you. Trying to suppress your emotions actually makes them stronger. It's like trying not to think about a pink elephant. The harder you try, the more that elephant dominates your thoughts. Scientists have studied this extensively. When people try to push down their emotions, several things happen. First, the emotion actually doesn't go away. It just goes underground, where it continues to influence your thoughts and behaviors. Second, the effort of suppression actually drains your mental energy, making you more likely to lose control later. And third, suppressing emotions often makes them more intense when they finally do surface. Think about it like a pressure cooker. You can keep the lid on tight for a while, but eventually all that pressure has to go somewhere. And when it does, it often explodes in ways that are far more destructive than if you just dealt with the steam as it arose. So if suppression doesn't work, what does? The answer might seem counterintuitive. Acceptance. Not resignation, not giving up, but genuine acceptance of what you're feeling in the moment. Let me share a technique that changes everything. The next time you feel a strong emotion, instead of fighting it, try this. Place your hand on your chest, take a deep breath, and say to yourself, I notice I'm feeling angry right now, or whatever the emotion is. Don't try to change it. Don't judge it. Just notice it. This simple act of acknowledgement does something remarkable. It activates your rational brain and creates just enough space between you and the emotion for you to choose how to respond. You're not suppressing the emotion, you're creating room to work with it. Think of emotions like weather. You wouldn't stand in a thunderstorm shaking your fist at the sky, demanding that it stop raining. You'd acknowledge the storm, maybe find some shelter, and wait for it to pass. Emotions work the same way. They're temporary experiences that will naturally shift and change if you don't resist them. The foundation of emotional mastery is knowing what you're feeling when you're feeling it. This sounds simple, but most of us are surprisingly bad at it. We might say we're stressed when we're actually disappointed, or fine when we're actually hurt. Here's a powerful exercise. Several times a day, ask yourself, what am I feeling right now? Don't think about it too hard, just notice the first thing that comes up. You might be surprised by what you discover. Real emotional awareness goes deeper than just naming emotions, though. It's about understanding your personal emotional patterns. Maybe you always feel anxious on Sunday nights. Maybe certain people or situations consistently trigger frustration. Maybe you feel energized after solving problems, but drained after too much social interaction. Start paying attention to these patterns like a curious scientist studying your own emotional weather system. When do storms typically roll in? What conditions create clear skies? What are your early warning signs that you need to take care of yourself? Every person has emotional triggers, specific situations, words, or behaviors that seem to instantly activate strong emotions. The key to mastery isn't avoiding these triggers, that's impossible, but understanding them so well that they lose their power to control you. Let me tell you about Marcus, an otherwise calm guy who turned into a completely different person in traffic. Whenever someone cut him off or drove slowly in the fast lane, he'd become furious, honking and cursing like his life depended on it. When Marcus started paying attention to his patterns, he realized that traffic triggered his deep need for fairness and control. In his mind, traffic rules weren't just suggestions, they were a social contract. And when people broke that contract, it felt like a personal attack on everything he believed about how the world should work. Once Marcus understood this about himself, everything changed. He couldn't control other drivers, but he could understand why certain behaviors affected him so strongly. He started reframing his experience. Instead of seeing bad drivers as personal attacks, he saw them as people who might be having emergencies or simply had different priorities than he did. Your triggers are unique to you, shaped by your experiences, values, and deepest needs. The goal isn't to eliminate them, that's probably impossible, but to understand them so well that they lose their power to control you.
Here's one of the most powerful concepts in emotional mastery: the difference between reacting and responding. When you react, you're being controlled by your emotions. When you respond, you're choosing your behavior consciously, even while feeling strong emotions. Imagine you get a harsh email from a colleague. A reaction might be to immediately fire back an equally harsh response, or to stew in anger for hours. A response might be to notice your anger, take a few deep breaths, and then decide how you want to handle the situation based on your values and goals, not just your immediate emotions. The key to responding instead of reacting is creating what we call the pause. This doesn't have to be a long meditation session. It can be as simple as taking 3 deep breaths or excusing yourself to the bathroom for a moment. The pause gives your rational brain time to catch up with your emotional brain. Here's a simple technique you can use immediately. When you feel a strong emotion arising, try the stop method. Stop what you're doing, take a breath, observe what you're feeling, and then proceed with intention rather than impulse. Now, let's talk about practical tools for managing intense emotions in the moment. These aren't about suppressing what you feel. They're about working with your emotions skillfully. First, there's the power of breathing. Your breath is the bridge between your conscious and unconscious mind, and it's one of the few aspects of your nervous system you can directly control. When you're emotionally activated, your breathing becomes shallow and quick. By deliberately slowing and deepening your breath, you send a signal to your nervous system that it's safe to relax. Try this. Breathe in for 4 counts, hold for 4 counts, breathe out for 6 counts. The longer exhale activates your parasympathetic nervous system, your body's built-in relaxation response. Second, there's the technique of emotional labeling. Research shows that simply naming your emotions with precision actually reduces their intensity. Instead of saying, "I feel bad," try to be specific. "I feel disappointed and a little embarrassed." The act of precise labeling engages your rational brain and naturally calms your emotional brain. Third, there's the power of physical movement. Emotions create energy in your body, and sometimes the best way to process that energy is through movement. If you're angry, try doing jumping jacks or going for a quick walk. If you're anxious, try gentle stretching or progressive muscle relaxation. Anger might be the most misunderstood emotion. We often think of it as purely destructive, but anger is actually your brain's way of telling you that something important to you is being threatened. The key is learning to hear anger's message without being controlled by its intensity. When you feel anger rising, ask yourself, what is this anger trying to protect? Maybe it's your sense of fairness, your need for respect, or your desire to protect someone you care about. Anger often contains important information about your values and boundaries. The goal isn't to never feel angry. That's neither possible nor healthy. The goal is to use anger's energy constructively. Channel that passion into clear communication, boundary setting, or positive action rather than destructive outbursts. Anxiety is your brain's alarm system designed to help you prepare for and avoid danger. The problem is that in our modern world, this system often goes off for situations that aren't actually dangerous, like public speaking, job interviews, or social gatherings. The key insight about anxiety is that it's always about the future, specifically about imagining negative outcomes that might happen. When you're anxious, your mind is essentially time traveling to potential disasters and experiencing them as if they're happening right now. One powerful technique for anxiety is called grounding. When you notice anxiety building, deliberately bring your attention to the present moment. Notice 5 things you can see, 4 things you can hear, 3 things you can touch, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. This anchors you in reality rather than in your worried imagination. Sadness is perhaps the most natural and necessary of human emotions. Yet we often treat it like something to be fixed or eliminated as quickly as possible. But sadness serves an important purpose. It helps us process loss, connect with others, and appreciate what's meaningful to us. The key to working with sadness is allowing it to flow naturally, rather than getting stuck in it or pushing it away. Sadness, like all emotions, is temporary, but only if you let it move through you. When you're sad, practice self-compassion. Treat yourself with the same kindness you'd show a good friend going through a difficult time. This doesn't mean wallowing or making the sadness worse. It means acknowledging your pain with gentleness rather than judgment. Emotional resilience isn't about being tough or never feeling difficult emotions. It's about developing the ability to bounce back from emotional challenges more quickly and learn from them rather than being defeated by them. Think of resilience like physical fitness. You don't build muscle by avoiding all challenges. You build it by gradually taking on more weight than you're comfortable with. Emotional resilience works the same way. Every time you navigate a difficult emotion skillfully, you're building your emotional fitness. One key aspect of resilience is what psychologists call cognitive flexibility, the ability to see situations from multiple perspectives. When something goes wrong, resilient people ask questions like, "What can I learn from this? How might this actually benefit me in the long run? What would I tell a friend in this situation?" Emotional mastery isn't something you achieve once and then forget about. It's a skill that requires regular practice, like learning to play an instrument or staying physically fit. One of the most powerful daily practices is what we call emotional check-ins. Several times throughout the day, simply pause and ask yourself, "How am I feeling right now? What do I need?" This simple practice builds self-awareness and prevents small emotional issues from becoming big ones. Another crucial practice is gratitude, not because you should feel grateful for everything that happens to you, but because gratitude literally rewires your brain to notice positive experiences more readily. Spend 2 minutes each morning or evening writing down 3 specific things you're grateful for and why they matter to you. Physical practices are equally important. Regular exercise, adequate sleep, and good nutrition form the foundation of emotional stability. When your body is well cared for, your emotional system naturally becomes more resilient. One of the most important skills in emotional mastery is learning to distinguish between your emotions and other people's emotions. If you're naturally empathetic, you might find yourself absorbing other people's stress, anxiety, or anger without even realizing it. Think of emotional boundaries like a semi-permeable membrane. You want to be open to connection and understanding, but you don't want other people's emotional states to completely take over your own. This is especially important in close relationships. You can care about someone's feelings without taking responsibility for managing those feelings. You can be supportive without becoming emotionally overwhelmed yourself. Here's something fascinating. Emotions are contagious. When you walk into a room, you're not just bringing your own emotional state, you're also picking up on everyone else's. This happens below the level of consciousness through subtle cues like facial expressions, body language, and tone of voice. Understanding emotional contagion gives you tremendous power in relationships. When you learn to manage your own emotional state, you naturally influence the emotional climate around you. If you stay calm during a conflict, you make it easier for others to calm down too. If you approach challenges with curiosity rather than defensiveness, you invite others to do the same. Many of us learned as children that certain emotions were bad or unacceptable. Maybe you learned that anger makes you a bad person, or that sadness is weakness, or that fear means you're not strong enough. These early lessons can create lifelong patterns of emotional suppression. Healthy emotional expression isn't about dumping all your feelings on everyone around you. It's about communicating your emotional experience in ways that strengthen rather than damage your relationships. This might mean saying, "I'm feeling overwhelmed right now and need a few minutes to collect myself," instead of snapping at someone. Or, "I'm feeling hurt by what just happened. Can we talk about it?" instead of withdrawing in silence. Just as you have standards for how you want to be treated in relationships, you can have standards for the emotional climate you want to create and maintain. This doesn't mean controlling other people's emotions. It means being intentional about what kind of emotional experience you want to have and contribute to. Maybe your standard is that conflicts in your household are handled with respect, even when emotions are high. Maybe it's that you don't accept being spoken to with contempt, regardless of what someone else is feeling. Maybe it's that you commit to addressing issues directly rather than letting resentment build up.
Emotional intelligence goes beyond managing your own emotions. It includes the ability to read, understand, and respond appropriately to others' emotions as well. This is a crucial skill for leadership, parenting, friendship, and really any human interaction. The key is learning to separate observation from interpretation. When someone seems upset, instead of assuming you know why, you might say, "I noticed you seem frustrated. What's going on?" This shows that you're paying attention without making assumptions about their experience. We all have deeply ingrained emotional patterns, ways of feeling and reacting that we've been practicing for years or even decades. The good news is that these patterns can be changed, but it requires patience and consistent practice. Start by identifying your most limiting emotional pattern. Maybe you always assume the worst when plans change. Maybe you shut down when criticized. Maybe you catastrophize whenever you face uncertainty. Once you've identified a pattern, you can begin to interrupt it. The moment you notice the pattern starting, pause and ask yourself, what would someone who handles this situation well do differently? Then experiment with a new response, even if it feels uncomfortable at first. Here's an advanced concept. You can actually use your emotions as fuel for positive change. Instead of seeing difficult emotions as obstacles, you can learn to see them as energy that can be channeled toward your goals. Frustration can become determination. Anxiety can become preparation. Anger can become boundary setting. Sadness can become deeper appreciation for what matters most to you. This doesn't mean forcing yourself to be positive about everything. It means learning to work with the energy that emotions provide rather than against it. The workplace can be one of the most challenging environments for emotional mastery. You're often dealing with high stakes, difficult personalities, and situations where you can't just walk away when things get intense. The key is preparation. Before important meetings or difficult conversations, take a moment to set an emotional intention. How do you want to show up? What's your primary goal for the interaction? How will you handle it if things get tense? During challenging workplace situations, remember that your emotional state is often more influential than your words. If you can stay grounded and professional while others are reactive, you naturally become someone people look to for leadership. If you're a parent, your emotional mastery skills become even more crucial. Children learn how to handle emotions primarily by watching how the adults around them handle emotions. Every time you manage a difficult moment with skill and grace, you're teaching your children invaluable life skills. This doesn't mean you have to be perfect. In fact, children benefit from seeing adults experience and work through difficult emotions in healthy ways. When you make emotional mistakes, you can model how to apologize, learn, and do better next time. The ultimate test of emotional mastery comes during genuine crises, moments when the stakes are high and emotions are intense. These are the times when all your practice pays off. During crisis, your first job is to manage your own emotional state so you can think clearly and make good decisions. This might mean taking deep breaths, quickly assessing what you can and cannot control, and focusing your energy on what's actually within your influence. Remember that in crisis, people look to whoever seems most emotionally stable. By managing your own state, you often end up helping everyone around you manage theirs too. As we come to the end of our time together, let's take a moment to reflect on what we've covered. We've explored why your brain creates emotions, learned the difference between reacting and responding, discovered practical techniques for managing difficult emotions, and built a complete framework for emotional mastery. But here's the most important thing I want you to remember. Emotional mastery is not about becoming someone who never feels difficult emotions. It's about becoming someone who can feel any emotion and still choose how to respond. You don't have to be perfect at this,
Nobody is. The goal is simply to be a little bit more skilled at working with your emotions today than you were yesterday. Every time you pause instead of react, every time you breathe through a difficult moment, every time you respond with intention rather than impulse, you're building the muscle of emotional mastery. Think of this as the beginning of a lifelong journey, not the end of a short trip. Your emotions will continue to challenge you, surprise you, and teach you things about yourself that you never knew. That's not a problem to be solved. That's the richness of being fully human. The techniques and insights we've discussed today aren't just concepts to think about. They're tools to use. Start small. Pick one technique that resonated with you and practice it for a week. Notice what changes, then add another tool to your toolkit. Remember Sarah from earlier who got hijacked by emotions during that presentation feedback. 6 months after learning these skills, she faced a similar situation. Her boss criticized a project in front of the team again. This time, Sarah felt the familiar surge of emotions, but instead of being controlled by them, she took a breath, acknowledged what she was feeling, and responded thoughtfully. The difference wasn't that she didn't feel the emotions, it's that she had learned to work with them skillfully. You have that same capacity within you. Your emotions are not your enemy. They're part of your intelligence, part of what makes you human, part of what connects you to others and helps you navigate this complex world. The journey of emotional mastery is ultimately a journey toward freedom. The freedom to feel fully while choosing wisely. The freedom to be authentic while being skillful. The freedom to be deeply human while being consciously responsive to life's challenges. Your emotions have been with you your entire life, and they'll be with you for the rest of your journey. Why not learn to work with them as allies rather than struggle against them as obstacles? The choice, as always, is yours. And now, you have the tools to choose well. Thank you for joining me on this exploration of emotional mastery. May your journey be filled with growth, wisdom, and the deep satisfaction that comes from knowing yourself and living skillfully in the world.